Hello everyone and welcome to session number 5 of the VAT Proficiency webinars. Today we're going to be looking at the VAT verification settings. So we're going to learn about the different settings, what they mean, and how to find out which ones are relevant to your business. My name is Abby and I'm going to be your host for this afternoon. We also have Michael and Tina on hand to answer questions throughout the session, because I'm sure there will be plenty, so please do bear with us on that front. The session's going to last around 30 minutes. May take a little bit less. It just depends on how many questions we have outstanding at the end. So before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. So what you will see is that you will be placed on mute automatically. If you do have any questions, however, you can use the questions panel down the right-hand side of your screen by clicking the option that looks like a little speech bubble with the question mark in the middle. This is then going to open up the panel where you can send your questions across, where either me, Michael or Tina will be able to pick these up for you. We do also have a handout for today. We've got a printer-friendly one and just a normal handout. You can download this by clicking on the button that looks like a little document with the folded corner. We do always recommend to download these handouts, as there is usually some helpful links to our help centre. So that is available for you to download. So just before we go on to what we're going to be covering on today's session, just want a reminder that we have 7 different sessions running, covering various places, put my teeth back in, various VAT topics. You'll need to attend 5 of the 7 live sessions and the quiz to receive that digital badge. Okay, so today we've got 7 sessions, but today we're going to be focusing on exploring the VAT verification checks. So we're going to be going through that in today's session. So we'll go down the route of kind of what does that look like. So we're going to be covering what are the VAT verification checks and what do they mean. We will take a look at the settings and how you can deselect what is not relevant to your business. We'll also talk about the results given by the checks, and then I'll briefly talk about the VAT audit option as well. So what are the VAT verification checks? So when you calculate your VAT return, it will run some verification checks, and it just helps you check your data before you submit it to HMRC or ROS if you're in Ireland. You can review the results of these checks, and if amendments are required, then that's the key part. If they're required, then you can make them before submitting them to HMRC. Now there are 8 checks, and by default they are all switched on. And we do always recommend to leave them switched on initially until you start to work out which ones work for you and your business and the type of processing that you do. And then once you know which ones may not be working for you, you can then start to switch those off. So like I said, these checks don't always indicate that something is wrong. They're highlighting something that may need your attention, and maybe you want to double check that information, but it's not always an indicator that something is correct. So just bear that in mind. Okay, so before we go into some demonstration, as this session is mainly demonstration, I just want to mention we often get questions on these sorts of sessions, the VAT questions, and what's different for Ireland. So the verification settings that we're going to go through today, the only difference is that the rates and the tax codes at the bottom section are slightly different. So you can see on the left, we've got the UK, we've got 21%, 18%, and the T1 tax code. And then on the right, you can see we've got the Ireland information there, and it's just slightly different percentages. So we've got 24%, 21%, and the T1 tax code at a rate of 23%. So that is the only difference that you're going to see on this session for if you are in Ireland. So when we go through the demonstration, I am going to be in UK, so don't be try not to be too confused if you do see different rates. That'll be the reason why. Okay, so we'll go straight into the demonstration. So I'm just going to pop over to my software. Okay, so there's two ways in which you can find the VAT verification settings. The first way is if you pop into settings and then into company preferences. I'm going to ask for my password, pop that in. Then we're going to go to the VAT tab along the top. And then at the very bottom, we've got the VAT verification settings. So we'll quickly pop through these here. So you've got different sections that you've seen on the screenshots before, on the slides, exactly the same window. So the first one we're going to go through is identify possible duplicate transactions. So first of all, you always want to be identifying when there's possible duplicate transactions. So this is just any transactions which look identical in software. Now, in some businesses, that may be something very odd that you wouldn't have on a regular basis. But then other businesses, you might have lots of duplicate transactions. So you might actually work on a subscription basis where all of the posting details are very similar. So, you might have ones where, the transactions look the same. Like I said, we're going to show you which ones in the software. I'm going to go through demonstration once we've actually run those checks as well. Because what it might do is it might actually highlight every single transaction that they've posted. So then you can pay attention to those ones that you might think are incorrect and make any relevant corrections. So the next one, we've got missing entries. So this is the next section down. So this is where we've got invoices or credits that have not been updated. So when you're using the invoices and credits module, you need to update them to the ledger for the invoice to show on the customer record. Now, if that's the case, it means that those invoices that haven't been updated aren't shown on the customer records, therefore they're not impacting our nominal records, and they're not impacting our VAT return. It relies on that SI transaction to be created in the transactions list, and that won't happen unless it's been updated to the ledger. In the past, when we have seen this, it's normally where maybe a business has been trying out the module for the first time. They've tried a couple of invoices and credits, and they're not quite sure whether they're going to be using that module. They're not ready to commit, and they haven't updated them to the ledger. So it could be that you just need to go and find those invoices and delete them from the invoices and credits module if it's not, a genuine transaction. But if it is a genuine invoice and it hasn't been updated, then you would need to be investigating, well, why hasn't it been updated? Is it that's just been missed out and we need to go and click update, or is there something stopping that invoice? It might be on hold for whatever reason. Next one down. So we've got the purchase orders which have been delivered but not invoiced. So this is only if you're using the purchase order module, which you will only have access to if you are using the professional variant of the software. So if you've had purchase orders that you've marked as delivered, you're seeing that you've received the goods, but you haven't popped the invoice on yet. Now that could be genuine, and it could be that you haven't received the invoice yet from your supplier, in which case you'll probably need to chase them for it. Or it could be that it hasn't yet been processed. It could be sitting in a pile waiting to be processed on your desk. So again, it just gives you those little things that you might need to start investigating. Next, we have identify transactions with a VAT value where the tax code is not included on the return. So this one tends to indicate that something more than likely is wrong. So this is where you've got a transaction with the VAT value where the tax code isn't included on the VAT return. So typically tax codes that we're talking about is the likes of T9, which is your non-VATable tax code. You tend to use T9 on your journals, but there could be instances, for example, a new starter has entered an invoice or a payment or a receipt, and they've used a T9 tax code, but then they've manually entered the VAT value. Next section down, we've got other potential issues. So the first one we've got is check VAT values on transactions for possible errors. So we've got VAT rate is more than 21% and VAT rate is less than 18%. So again, this is where I mentioned this is where it's slightly different. For Ireland, you'll have slightly different rates. As an example of this option, might flag transactions is when a supplier invoice doesn't give you a full VAT breakdown. Now that full VAT breakdown or that full VAT value, sorry, may be split into standard 20%, but part of it may be zero rated. But then they've just give you one for overall value. The reason this flag is because we should be processing one transaction per tax code. So just take that into consideration. If you do process them as one transaction, it is going to flag them on the verification checks. Next one we've got is the most common tax code. So here is identify sales and purchase transactions not using your most common tax code specified below. You can see there mine's T1 at 20%. Now this option does only give you, one tax code to pop in here, but most businesses will use more than one. So as default, this option will be set to T1, but if your most commonly used tax code is not T1, then we would suggest changing it to the relevant one. However, don't be surprised if transactions still get flagged, as it is just going to be the fact that you can only choose one tax code to pop into here, and majority of you will be using, more than one tax code. Next one we've got is identify journal transactions where the tax code is not selected as non-VATable. So here, there may be instances where we've recommended you post a journal entry to reflect the disposal of a fixed asset, and you've used a VATable tax code, so for example, T1. However, 9 times out of 10, when you post a journal, you will use the T9 non-VATable tax code. So any occasion where you might have had to use a different tax code, it will flag this up. But when you do your checks, it's always best just to check it just in case it has been changed in error. Lastly, we have identify possible incorrect EC transactions. Now we are post-Brexit, so we no longer use those tax codes, so it's no longer looking for the incorrect VAT rates. So if you are going to switch any of these options off, it is most likely going to be this one due to it no longer being relevant. Like I say, any that you do want to switch off, simply just untick and then just click OK, and that will save that for you when you come to do your checks. Another place that you can find the checks as well is if we go into the VAT module, we click on VAT return, and in this section here we've got prepare for your VAT return. Always make sure that you take your backup before you do your VAT return. If you've been attending these sessions throughout the badging event, you will know that you cannot undo a VAT return, you have to restore. So always make sure that you're doing your backup, you enter your date range, and here is the other way you can access your settings before calculating your VAT return. So exactly the same settings we've just gone through, but just another place that you can find it as well. What we'll do now is we'll just quickly run a VAT return. I'm just going to leave my period as it is, just so I can get those figures. It's got 14 transactions. The only bit that we're going to be looking at today is the verification results here. So you can see I've got a little yellow warning triangle. I've got 24 potential queries that have been identified in your VAT return. So that's based on the checks that I have ticked. It's done those checks for me. So we'll click View Results, and we are presented with this window here. So the first one we're going to cover again, so kind of going to go back through kind of what we've just been going through in the settings, but we're going to actually see some transactions now. So you've got possible duplicate entries. We've got 4 of those. So we'll click on View. So you can see here, I've got 4 transactions, 4 bank payments. They've got the same reference, but they're also the same value. So you might only have a couple like me, or you may have a big list of transactions. You do also have the option to print or send to Excel. And you do get this within each result. What we recommend is that you do your checks first. Make sure you make a note of all the amendments that you need to make. If you want to put these in an Excel document, so you've got a list, writing down transaction numbers. And then what we recommend is you go out, because you have to come out of the VAT return to make any changes. So then you figure, because when you come back in, you'll have to recalculate just in case any values have changed. So it's definitely worth either printing them, writing them down, make your change, make a note of all your checks, then go back and do them. So then you can recalculate. So like I say, we've got 4 transactions here. So they appear to be duplicates because they've got the same transaction type, the same account reference, same nominal, date, same amount. Now, like I said before, if you're using something like cash sales, and you're doing a lot of similar transactions, this could be majority of your transactions. So you might think, well, this check doesn't work for me, because then you can deselect that option. However, if these are genuine transactions and they just happen to be pretty much the same, I can just ignore that warning. And you don't need to do anything extra to ignore them. You just simply close out and you go into the next section. Next, we've got the possible missing entry section. So we've got 3 invoices or credits which have not been updated. So as you can see in here again, it gives me the invoice number, account reference, name, date, value, tax amount. So it's just telling me these ones, so 2, 3, and 4, haven't been updated to the ledgers. You might look at this and you know instantly that this was maybe when you were testing the module, having a bit of a play around, so you can either delete it when you go to make your other amendments, or you just simply ignore the warning. Or if it's a one that needs investigating, then make a note of it so that you can go and chase up what is going on with those particular invoices. Next, we've got the purchase orders, which have been delivered but not yet invoiced. Now, quite a lot of users who utilize the purchase orders module do not necessarily update the ledger to create the invoice, and may just create it manually using the batch invoice option in the suppliers module. So in this case, those purchase orders are going to show up as not updated to the ledger, which will then result in them showing in this check. If that is the case, you can just ignore the check and continue. If you do update the PO to the ledger, then it may be that it's in your list to invoice already, it could have been missed, or you need to chase the invoice with your supplier. So again, these checks are mainly just indications of, does this need your attention? Do you potentially need to look further into it? So like I said, not everything is going to need corrections. Next, we've got 4 transactions with a VAT value where the tax code is not included on the VAT return. Now, this is the one where I said normally it's probably going to indicate that something has gone wrong. What we have is the transactions here. We've got four SI transactions. You can see it's got a net amount, it's got a tax amount. However, the tax code is T9, and that is a non-vatable tax code usually. So that can't have a VAT value. So that transaction, is that something that would need investigating? That again is probably the one where, you know, you might have a new starter, they've popped in a T9 tax code by accident. They thought, well, the tax amount's not coming through, well, pop it in. You know, if it's standard, you know, T1, they've just worked out the amount and popped it in themselves manually, which is why the checks are coming through. So again, it might be that you just need to go through and update those tax codes. Next, we've got 4 transactions with an unexpected VAT value. So this is the one that I was talking about, where the percentages were set in the verification checks. Then it was to flag anything outside of the 21% and the 18%. So what it's done is it's checked all my transactions, it's looked at the net amount and estimated what the tax should be, which is, you know, based on what the rate is for T1, which is 20%. But unfortunately, these transactions have come through. As you can see, I've got 25, you know, £50 net, £25 tax, which isn't 20%. So that's just asking me to investigate that. And it could be an example where maybe part of the invoice value was 0 rated and the rest was actually standard rated. So it could be that this invoice, you know, should be split into 2 separate transactions. But again, this is where you would do your investigation. Next, we've got the sales and purchase transactions not using your most commonly used tax code. So this is the one I said where it's always going to come up. You'll always find something in here, and this is because I've processed transactions on the tax code that isn't my most common one, which was set to T1 as default. Obviously, I've got transactions coming through, which I could have posted on, you know, here's T9, I could also have T2s, you know, I could have multiple different tax codes. So you may find, like I say, it's going to show more than one, or you might see a lot of your transactions in here. All you need to do is just check that I've processed them correctly. And if I have, I can just click and move on to the next check. And then lastly, we've got 2 journal transactions where the tax code is not selected as non-vatable. So this is where the tax code is set to T1. Journals are usually on T9. And, you know, 9 times out of 10 that is going to be the case, so it won't flag up. But for example, what I've had to do this month is I've had to sell an asset, such as a car, and following all the steps that Sage have provided me using the articles, I need to show the net amount and the tax amount on the journal. So it would be flagged on the VAT return as using T1. So in this case, it would be correct. So that I can just move on. But like I say, it's always best to come in here and check. Again, lastly, I've paused the EC transactions because it's not relevant at the moment. So you can see it's telling me that that one's turned off. So that is the VAT verification checks. And that is the summary that it's going to give you. So like I say, it's just asking you to double check some of these figures so that you can be confident with the figures that you're submitting to HMRC or ROS if you're in Ireland. So there's not necessarily going to be always something incorrect when there's when the process flags transactions, but it's giving you an opportunity to double check before proceeding and reconciling. But just a reminder, You must come out of the VAT return and make those changes, as the figures will need to be recalculated depending on what has been changed. So I'm going to pop back to my slides. Don't forget, keep your questions coming. And so you've been keeping Michael and Tina quite busy. Okay, so briefly want to very briefly want to talk. Obviously, we're coming to a close soon, so I just want to briefly mention that you can there's also an option called the VAT audit option, and it presents very similar options, but this option you don't have to run the VAT return. You will find this option in the VAT module along the top of the navigation bar. So I'll just quickly show you where you can find this. Just pop back to my software. So in your VAT module down the left hand side, then along the top, you've got your VAT audit and you've got your tax values audit. So when you click into these options, you can see these options are quite similar. Might be slightly worded differently, but it pretty much does give you very similar information. You've got your purchase analysis tab and you've got your transaction analysis tab as well. So you can also run that as well, and it will do very, very similar checks. Just saves you having to calculate the VAT return just to get those checks done. You just want to have a quick check before you want to, because you want to be able to just do your VAT return straight away. You might want to do your checks first to see if there's any amendments that need to be done. So you've also got that option as well. Okay, so I'm just going to pop back to my slides and I'm going to summarize the session. Now's the opportunity to get any last questions in before we wrap up the session. So to summarize, the checks are optional. Any checks can be switched off if they're not relevant to your business. Like I say, we do recommend to keep them on until you get familiar with the options and then switch them off as you go, just make it more relevant. Any transactions identified by the verification checks can be investigated prior to submission. Checks do not indicate a transaction is wrong, just a transaction which requires a bit more attention. And lastly, you've got the VAT audit option, which can be run at any time to help investigate transactions. I have included some helpful links down the right-hand side. Ensure your VAT return is correct, check for VAT audit issues, and also the VAT verification reports as well. Just a reminder what we've got, like I say, in terms of this badge, we've still got another 3 sessions and the quiz for you to get registered for those to be able to earn your digital badge. Now, the digital badge is something, we've done quite a few badges now, they've proved very popular, and it's also something you can share on social media, such as your LinkedIn, if you want to share with your colleagues, your clients, just let people know that you're a bit more proficient in your Sage Accounts software. Got a question coming there from Steve, and I just want to pick this up before we wrap the session. How do I recalculate my VAT return after doing amendments? So I'll just pop back to my software. So when you go in, I'm going to kind of repeat a little bit kind of what I've done. So you would calculate the VAT return if you're going to do it this way. You'll go into your VAT verification checks. You'll make a note of all your transactions that you need to make a note of. What you'll do is you'll close back out. Says you're going to close the VAT return. Anything that's been calculated is going to be lost. That's fine. You click yes. You go and do your transaction amendments. So that might be going into transactions and finding the transaction, making some edits. And it's just a case of just going back in to where you've just been. So back into the VAT, back into VAT return. And then when you recalculate, it'll then calculate, obviously if I haven't made any changes, so nothing's going to change in terms of my verification results. But when you calculate, you may find that that has slightly changed. Okay. So I'm just going to pop back to my slides again. So just while waiting for the last couple of questions to be picked up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this session up. If you've got what you need today and you want to leave the session, you're going to receive an email in around an hour or so with links to both our webinar schedule and today's recorded session for you to refer back to if needs be. Upon exiting the session, you are going to see a survey at the end. If you could please pop a comment on that feedback. It shouldn't take you too long. It'll be a short comment, a long comment. I do like to read every single feedback on there. What you liked about the session, what you'd like to have maybe seen done differently. Did you find it useful? Is it going to help you better with your software? So just pop a little comment on there for me. Anything would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so majority of the questions have been picked up. So what I'll do is I'll wrap this session up. I want to say thank you to Michael and Tina, who's been on hand today to answer your questions, but also thank you to you all for your participation today. Just a reminder, we've got plenty of sessions over the next couple of weeks, so don't be shy and get registered. So I want to say another thank you and take care.